Hello, everyone. Welcome to another GoDaddy Pro EMEA meetup. Today is 28th February, and we have a smashing guest. Actually, our first guest, we know it's Laura Elizabeth. Hello, Laura. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
And our surprise guest, we will still see because we don't know who will actually get signed up from the friends that we have tonight who'd like to join us on screen on potential project that we will be working tonight. So today we'll be talking about web design, one of the topics that I think people fight the most because when you have a website design project, then I'm sure there are many people who have different views. So Laura will help us actually to understand other people's views and to get some principles about web design. So tell us, Laura, please, what are we going to learn today?
So, we're going to learn about the design process that I use myself and the design process that I also teach to my students. And it's what I thought would be the most useful is to go through an actual redesign process. So, we're going to start with a website, just a made up website that's quite generic looking. And we're just going to go through everything from layout to typography to color and see how we can improve the website using different tweaks. So, yeah, I'm hoping that you're going to learn how, if you're working on it doesn't have to be a website, but if you're working on any design project, how you can use this process to create something iteratively.
That's awesome. So I'm sure that every one of us here have a different approach how to design or build a website from scratch, right? So I'm sure we're going to have so many similarities and then differences. So without further ado, I will ask you to share your screen. Also, I will ask our friends who joined us today to ask us questions in the chat. And then if there is immediate need, we will stop Laura, or perhaps we might answer those in the end. Thank you, Laura. The floor is yours.
Okay, sounds good. So just to remind you, I can't see the chat as my presentation's full screen. So yeah, feel free to just jump in and interrupt me, anytime. So don't worry about interrupting me at all. But I'm basically going to start by telling you a story about my husband when he decided to build his ultimate gaming machine. So he did what everyone does when they start a new project. He researched all the best parts for this machine. He ordered the equipment. He ordered a motherboard, a GPU that was really expensive, and a case that glowed all these funny colors. And a few days later, he was sat on our tiled bathroom floor because apparently, when you're building a computer, you have to work on tiles. I didn't know that. He was reading manuals. He was watching YouTube tutorials, basically just trying to piece it all together. And after about 6 hours of straight work and a really sore back, it resembled what you see in front of you, an actual computer. And the time came to switch it on and start playing with it. So he plugged it in, he pressed the on button, and nothing happened. Completely blank screen. Oh, God. He spent all that money, he spent all that time researching and building it, and it's just not working. But instead, he just kind of shrugged his shoulders. He didn't really react. Uh, let's fix this. And he got straight back to work and started mending his machine. So a little bit later on, I asked him, I said, "So why didn't you freak out? After all that hard work for nothing to have happened, it must have been really frustrating." And what he said surprised me. He said, "I didn't freak out because I haven't built a gaming machine in about 10 years. I wasn't ever expecting it to work the first time, but I knew that I could debug this. So if the light didn't switch on, I knew there was an issue with the power. If the light worked, but the screen didn't, it was the monitor. It was just a case of assessing the situation and figuring out where the problem is." So, as some of you might already know, I run a website called Design Academy. And my goal with that is to teach developers, like my husband, how to design websites and apps so they don't look like they've been designed by a developer. And I've been working really hard to figure out how I can teach something like design to people who are technical, to people who, as we were just talking about, appreciate and enjoy well-designed things, but don't necessarily be designed themselves. And what I realized was that if my husband had been designing a website for 6 hours, if he watched tutorials, read articles on color theory, and then stood back to admire his work, and it then he'd have thought, this is pointless. I just don't get design. I don't have that wacky creative flair. This isn't for me. And what I came to realize is that design is a bit like building a gaming machine. So you can read all the right documentation, you can watch all the right videos and presentations like this one, and it still probably won't actually work. Even for designers, it probably isn't going to look good the first time you create something, but you shouldn't expect it to. Because like with a gaming computer, when it doesn't work the first time, you need to stand back, identify where the issues are, and then fix them one by one, and just go back and keep doing that over and over and over again. And that's what I'm going to be talking to you about today. So I'm going to take a website, like I said, and I'm going to walk you through the steps that I took to debug it and improve your design. And it's my hope that you can follow similar steps like this and take a website, whether it's one that you've already got or whether it's a brand new one, and in small steps, improve it. So these are the things that we're going to take a look at. So we'll talk about basically what you look at first, what's the most important, where do you want the user to go next, what do you want to do. We're going to look at how to come up with layouts. We're going to look at photography, so how to choose finding great colors, and then we'll go through adding a little bit of polish. And this is the website we're going to use. So I chose this one because I think it's a fairly typical portfolio website that I see usually by developers. I know not everyone here is a developer, but this is sort of a kind of templatey website that I've seen quite a lot. It's not horrendous, but it definitely could be improved. And this is the design that we're going to end up with. So it's still pretty simple, but hopefully you'll agree that it looks a little bit more put together, looks a little bit more interesting. You're led through it a bit better, and yeah, it's just a nicer design overall. And we haven't actually used any fancy techniques, so I didn't want to do anything that people here wouldn't be able to recreate themselves. So I'm going to show you step by step how we debugged the design on the left and turned into the one on the right. Okay, so the first step is to talk about hierarchy. And one of the biggest problems with the original website is I don't quite know where to look or what to click on. It's not really telling me what to do. So as a user, I really want to be led around the website. So what should I read first? What should I do, and in what order? And there are a few key issues here that we're going to address to sort this out. So the first thing is we have quite an intense and cluttered navigation. So I want to ask ourselves, do we need all these links in the main navigation, or can we put some of them elsewhere? The sidebar seems to take up a lot of prominence, but I think it's the content on the right that should be the first thing that we look at, because we generally read left to right. The headline of hello is quite unengaging, considering it's probably, I'd say, the second most prominent thing on the page after the image. These headings could also use some differentiation, so they all look quite similar, aside from maybe a slight size change. And finally, this what will you get heading, this is a small thing, but it has equal spacing between the previous text and the next 4 points. So it's not immediately clear which section it belongs to. So let's look at these one by one. Okay, so the first thing was the navigation. So as you can see in the bigger image, this is where I've made the changes. And all I've done is I've consolidated it a bit and I've removed some of the unnecessary items. I then added a button around the contact link to turn it into a call to action, because I'm assuming this is the action that we would want people on the website to take. And just to point out, I'm not really going to talk about strategy or content in this presentation because it would make it way too long. So I'm just focusing on the visual design. And then I moved the whole navigation to the right-hand side to keep it away from the main logo. So the next thing I did was I moved the sidebar to the right of the page. The contact information is important, but especially now we've got this button, it's not the first thing we should see. So we, like I said earlier, we read left to right, so we should have the text on the right, text on the left, and the supporting content on the right. So my next issue was the hello headline wasn't engaging enough, so I made the heading more meaty. And by the way, if I'm going too fast, feel free to stop me or tell me to slow down a little bit. But hopefully, this is a okay speed. But basically, if this was a real project, like I said earlier, we'd be looking at the copywriting to see whether the message is relevant. But because we're just focusing on, I'm going to leave it as it is. And basically, all I did was I took the first sentence of the text below and I put it in the same style as the heading to just make it a little bit more interesting. So we also so I always say to myself, if I'm going to have a new heading style, make sure that it's different enough from the previous ones to justify it. So if you've got two really similar ones, just collate them and make them into one. And so we can keep the main heading in this larger font in a lighter weight. And I've just made these smaller headings bold, so it just stands out a little bit more. And the last thing that I wanted to change was making the will you get headline obvious which block of text that it belongs to. And in the last version, the spacing between the what will you get paragraph, the one before and the one after, it was exactly the same. But when you're designing, it's really important to group relevant content together. So in this example here, if you see the middle circle on the right, if you're on a website, it might not be immediately obvious whether the text for the icon is above or below. So you just need to make sure that everything is grouped together. So increase the spacing based on how different an element is from the next one. And this is a really small change, but I think it's really important. It can be applied basically everywhere. So we've applied this here, and you can see small change, but I think it makes it better. So this is the before and after of the hierarchy, and it's not actually much to look at right now. You might actually argue that the original maybe looks a bit better. But what's really important is it's starting to be differentiated. So I'm starting to be led around the website. So I can see that this person is a product creator, designer, speaker, rather than just seeing that they're a person who says hello. I'm seeing that I can contact them, which makes me think maybe, I can work with them. And it's just made it a little bit better, but a little bit more readable. So now the next step is to come up with some layout. So this is sort of where the design part comes into place. And so currently everything looks quite cluttered. So I just want to make it a little bit easier on the eyes. And the process that I usually use to come up with layouts, and I've doing this exact thing on the project that I'm working on at the minute, is looking at a mixture of the content blocks that we've got to work with, then looking at other websites with similar content blocks, and then mixing and matching them and sketching my own versions in thumbnail form. So these sketches are always quick and they're always pretty ugly. They take like 10 seconds. They're really nothing special. But I just want to think about how every block of content could be displayed. And I find it's much faster than trying to do anything digitally. So what I do is I go to inspiration websites, or I've already collected inspiration websites that I want to use, and I just look through them and try to see if any of my content would fit in any of these blocks and whether I like any of these layouts for my design. And I basically take them and I mix them and match them. It doesn't matter that the branding doesn't fit. It doesn't matter if, the grid is all different, if the fonts are just crazy, because basically what we're going to do is we're going to take a layout that we've built up from existing designs, and then we're going to brand it to match our own layout. And that's honestly what I do for every single project. So for this website, I'm actually going to keep the layout pretty simple. So I'm not going to change it too drastically. It's build up to something that looks good. And the first thing I always do when I'm doing a redesign is look at the column lengths. So if you see the body text where it says I'm the founder of 3 products, it looks pretty. And it's fairly well known that the ideal character length for a line should be somewhere between 45 and 75 characters per line. I don't stick religiously to this, to be honest, but it gives you a good starting point as to how short or long your column lengths should be. And the smaller the text, typically the lower end of the scale that you want to be. So if we use this as a bit of a guide and we take the first line of copy on our website, it comes in at 128 characters. So all we need to do is just reduce this column length to make the text fit within that range. And this is what it looks like here. And as you can see, the first line now comes in at 61 characters, which is within the recommended range. And I actually think this looks a lot better already. I think it looks a lot more readable. But you might have noticed that we now have the issue of this really awkward looking block of white space. So let's see what we can do here. Now, if we look at the different chunks that make up the website, we can try and rearrange them to find something that fits. So we have this sidebar, we have this content area, and we have these 4 services. So I'm just going to make these squares so you can see them a bit better. What if we could fit the column next to this gap? We'd have to reduce the length, obviously, quite drastically. But we could do this by maybe moving these logos underneath here because they look messy in a vertical line anyway, and I don't really like them there. And we can put the sidebar and make it fill that space neatly. So now we have this big white space on the right-hand side, which has caused another problem. But all we can do now is just move everything to the center, which looks so much better. And the next thing I want to do to change the layout is the navigation. So it's not this big bright bar at the top. Currently, I think it stands out a little bit too much and it looks separate from the rest of the page. So I'm going to remove the green bar and just align it with the rest of the content. So it's looking a bit cleaner now. Hopefully you agree, but I think everything still looks a little bit squashed together. So let's fix the spacing. And spacing, or more commonly lack of spacing, is one of the most common issues that I see with websites. So we're going to work on that next. And what I typically like to do is pick one unit and then multiply or divide to come up with spacing measurements. So I'll pick a simple number like 10 pixels. And I'll multiply or divide by 10 to come up with different spacing measurements that I can use in my designs to keep it consistent. So this is the current website, and we can build up these spacing units based on 10 pixels. So how about we make our paragraph size 20 pixels? So that's what this looks like here. And then 30 pixels can be the space within each content block. So in between here, we can make it 30 pixels. And then 100 pixels can separate the content blocks from each other. So this is the website with the spacing sorted out. And it's another small change, but I think these small changes are so important because they're acting as a foundation for the rest of the design. So whenever I'm designing something, the first step is to get something that looks clean and ordered, and then we start making it interesting. A mistake that a lot of people make is they start trying to make it interesting from the get-go because that's the fun part, or maybe that's the part they're more nervous about, so they want to get it over and done with to see if they can actually do it. But I really would encourage any of you to try to just not think about colors, imagery, anything, unless you've got things that you definitely are going to use, and just make it look ordered and easy to read and easy to navigate. So let's continue with getting this layout finalized. And I'm not really keen on the section that's highlighted here. So we have this odd space and it looks like there's too much crammed into this small area. So we can split up the content into these 3 sections. So we've got a profile image, contact information, and maybe a call to action. So how can we reorganize this? So I'm going to make it into blocks again so it's easier to see. Well, maybe we can make the picture bigger to add some more color to the page and make it more interesting, and overlap the contact information maybe as some kind of contact card. And we can make the email sign up into a call to action and put it right at the bottom of the page. So let's have a look what this looks like. Okay, so this is looking much better already. We've got rid of that awkward space and it's just a lot more interesting, especially if you compare it to how it was before. So the whole page just, I think, looks a lot more engaging now. And we can just make this call to action a little bit bigger so we've got something to work with. I added a short sentence underneath to make it more obvious as to what you're signing up to get. And, feel free to add or edit content as long as it doesn't affect the messaging or affects it in a positive way. And this layout, I would say, is pretty much done for now. So we can move on to choosing the right fonts. So the font we have here is Arial, which is a default system font. And it looks a little bit plain. And considering the website is pretty minimal in terms of graphics and colors, I think the typography needs to be really polished. So we're going to have a look for some fonts that we can use that have a bit more interest. Now, the way that I usually go about choosing fonts is it's more of a long-term plan, but I choose them by keeping an eye on website inspiration. A Google Chrome extension called What Font, which allows me to really quickly see the font that they have used. I keep a note of ones that I like to come back to for future projects. For the purpose of this, though, I'm going to assume you don't already have a list of fonts that you like yet. It's probably going to be something that you end up with in the future if you do a lot more with design. Everyone has their favorite fonts that they use over and over again. But for now, we're going to use a different technique. So these 3 websites have really good font inspiration. FontPair is fantastic for finding combinations of fonts. Type.io is really good for seeing real life websites that use the fonts. So you can use the fonts that they have actually used, and this is all curated for you. And then Typewolf has some really great lists, and I honestly think this is the best resource if you want to learn more about fonts and typography. I've actually bought their lookbooks, and I really like them because basically they've collated fonts in different typography in different styles. So they've sort of done the hard work for you. So I really recommend their lookbooks. So we're going to go to type.io and look for some combinations that we can use. So I really like these 2 typefaces, Brandon Grotesque and Open Sans. Brandon Grotesque is a typeface full of character, which makes it great for headings, but not so great for body copy. And Open Sans is a very clean, clear font, which is very readable. And just so you know, when I actually do the design process, I don't always find the right fonts first time. I'll test multiple different fonts before finding the right one. So, if you look at websites and then find fonts you really like and try them in your design and it doesn't work, don't feel discouraged. You just need to try a few more. So we're going to apply these to the website, and this is basically the result. Oops, sorry about that. Let me turn. You not made a note to do that before I started, and I obviously forgot. But anyway, just because what I want to point out is just because we've picked a nice typeface, it doesn't mean the typography is finished. We still have some work to do, but we're going to go. And the other thing that I wanted to tap at this point is that I personally, most of the time now, use premium typefaces. So I go to myfonts.com and I'll buy a typeface for a project. If I'm working on a client project, they will buy it. I'll get the license on their behalf. If I'm working on a project for myself, I'll buy a typeface. Typefaces are very expensive, but a lot of work goes into them. I actually know type designers, and they can spend years crafting these typefaces. So, they might seem expensive, but they're not for the amount of work they're put into. The typeface on this presentation is Sierra Pro, which is a premium typeface. And I just think once you start using premium ones, it's really hard to go back to free ones. But I understand that a lot of people don't have it in their budget. So using the websites that I've shared with you earlier will hopefully help you choose good fonts. But I wanted to point that out because, I want to show you exactly what I do when I design. So the next thing we're going to do once we've got our typefaces, we've applied them, is we're going to size them. So there are a couple of options for getting you started with choosing the right size for your typography. And as you get more experienced, you'll be able to do this by eye. But for now, I'm going to give you a couple of options to make it a little bit easier for you if you're starting out. So the first option is using something called the modular scale. And the modular scale is basically a set of pre-designed values that are designed to work harmoniously together. So most design tools have a modular scale built in. So when you select the font size tools, these sizes are not random, they're based on the modular scale. And using these values is great because they are designed to work harmoniously with each other. But the big downside is that you can end up taking these values as gospel instead of trusting your instinct. And what I mean by that is you may stick to the modular scale even in situations where it's not working. And you really need to use your eye in typography. You can use the modular scale as a starting point, but there's no guarantee that these values will work for every use case. So I really want to encourage you to trust your instinct. If something doesn't look right to you, it's probably not right. So feel free to adjust it. The modular scale isn't going to solve all your problems for you. But the second option for sizing your typography is to use existing websites and just copy values from there. And this is the option that I use most often after sizing by eye. And it's what I did to teach myself about typography without having to go in depth into, all the science behind typography. So again, you can use WhatFont and you can see the sizes and the line height, which is also important. You can see what they're using and you can try them in your own design. So the benefit here is that you have a solid system that's already been put together by experienced designers, so it's more likely to work well. And you might be surprised, for example, that you would use a 60 pixel size and a 69 pixel line height. That might be more of a line height than you expect, less of one, but it will just open your eyes a bit to how other designers do it. But the downside is if your typeface is too different from the one that you are using as inspiration, the values might be completely off. And without getting too deep into typography theory, it's sort of hard to explain why. But when you use this technique, you need to choose a website using preferably the same font or at least very similar fonts that you have chosen to give it the best chance of success. Because a lot of the time, this font here that's 60 pixels in our font Brandon Grotesque will probably look quite different because I know Brandon Grotesque is a font that looks a lot smaller than the others, even though it's not. And again, this is just a little bit too deep for this presentation, but fonts of the same size can look drastically different sizes. So just keep that in mind. So let's try applying one of these methods to our design. But again, remember, you should always finish your typography off by eye for the best results. So I found this website that also uses Brandon Grotesque as its main font. So we are just going to take these values and apply them to our design. So here's what it looks like. And this is a huge improvement from before. And it was really easy for us to do. You know, we didn't have to really think much at all. We just, like we've been doing for this whole thing, we've sort of been taking inspiration from other places, using it not to copy, but to build up our own layouts as easily and quickly as possible. So now with that sorted, we can move on to the next part of our design, which is finding great colors to complement our design. So aside from polish, which is the last step of this presentation, you'll notice that we're working on colors last. And many people think they need to choose their colors at the start of a project, but I've found in my experience of creating my own designs and watching students create designs, that's too difficult a lot of the time. It's much better to work on creating a clean, well-structured design and then deciding how much color needs to be added towards the end, because often it's much less than you would originally think that you need to add. So the first step in choosing colors is to create a palette that we can work with. And it can be a bit daunting trying to choose a brand color just seemingly out of thin air. But here are a few things that you can keep in mind to help you decide what you should use. First, you can check the colors of your competitors. Do most of them use a particular color, for example, blue? If so, why not try something completely different like orange or red to help you stand out? Second, are there any specific colors that appeal to your audience? For example, the colors of a plumbing website might look different, will probably look different from a children's birthday party website. So use something that will appeal to your audience, not necessarily you. And last, if you've already decided on some imagery, you can use that imagery to generate a palette for you. And this is the route that we're going to go down for our website. So since we already have this featured image here that we know we're going to use, it's got some color in it, we can use a color palette generator like this one from Canva, to create a palette for us based on our photograph. So this is the palette that it's generated. It's actually given us some quite muted tones. I actually don't mind it, but I was expecting something a little bit more bright. If I did this and I didn't like the muted tones, I would probably use the eyedropper tool in whatever design software you're using and just manually select the brighter shades from the image myself. But for this exercise, I want to use what's been generated for us. So the first thing we're going to do before we apply the color is create a more flexible palette. So we want to make some tints and shades for our colors, which will just give us a little bit more flexibility when we're applying them. So if you type into any search engine, tint and shade generator, lots of websites will come up. They're all pretty much the same, so you can use any that you like. This is probably the first one that came up, maketintsandshades.com. But generally, you'll just paste your hex codes of your colors and it will generate tints and shades of each one. So here's what we have from our color scheme. So we've got a really wide palette of colors we can use now. So this is the base color. And these darker ones are the shades. And the tints are the lighter ones at the bottom. And we're not going to use all of these colors because this is quite a lot. But I always think it's nice to have a range just in case we need them. So let's apply these colors and try and remember that less is almost always more, especially when you're just starting out with design. So here are the different areas that I'm going to apply these colors. And I always think about where I'm going to apply them before I actually apply them. And this is what it looks like after being applied. So you can see that we've used various tint shades and base colors for different areas. And we've actually applied it pretty minimally. We may, in practice, have to make some changes to these colors, especially when you're using it with text, to make sure that it's readable. But I'm not going to do that for the sake of this. But before we are completely done with color, we just need to remember to add in some to the typography. So I usually like to have a darker gray for the headings and a lighter gray for the paragraphs. And this is a small change that might not be instantly recognizable, but it just adds that little extra layer of polish in a design. So this is where I've added the lighter grays. And this is the before and after of the color section. Hopefully you can see on the screen. I know if you're, my screen's a little bit dark at the minute because it's dark outside, so it's harder to see. But if you up your brightness, you should be able to see it a little bit. And as you can see, it's not really a huge change, but it just adds a little bit more interest, adds a little bit of color. And like I said, if we wanted to, we could make these colors a lot more vibrant and bright. But using the generator gives us a starting point for the colors that we can use. Okay, so that leads us on to our last step in debugging this particular design, which is adding some polish. And this is the bit that you'll do over and over again. Just keep adding polish until you're happy with it. Take a break and then add some more. So let's have a look and see which areas could use a little bit extra. This is where we analyze the design again and just pick out things that you're not happy with. And if possible, I prefer to take a break at this point, at least sleep on it, preferably come back to it in a day or two and come back with fresh eyes. So let's see what we can find. Okay, so the first thing is this paragraph. I think it's a little bit too dense, a bit hard to read. We've got this random space here, which just looks a little bit awkward. We've got inconsistent capitalization, so it's not consistent. The left side of the website is much more heavy compared to the right-hand side. It all looks like it's going to fall over a bit. Everything just generally looks a little bit flat. And we don't have any icons other than in the contact card. We don't really have much imagery, so I wouldn't mind seeing if there's anything we can do there. And we just have a bit of an overall generic look, which I want to try and fix. Okay, so let's make some changes based on those issues. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to see if we can rewrite this paragraph to make it less dense. And remember, you can always rewrite or reorder text in design as long as you don't negatively impact the messaging. So I've taken out the different products and I've put them in a list, which not only looks much cleaner, but it's also easier to read and digest. And here's what that looks like. The next thing is I want something to go in this space here, but I don't really have any imagery that's relevant. So all I'm going to do to fix this is to just center the whole section, which evens out the spacing on both sides. And because it's the only thing centered, it makes the call to action much more impactful. Next, you might have noticed, it's probably been bugging a few of you, that this capitalization is pretty inconsistent. So we have all lowercase in the logo and in the second heading, and then there's just sentence case everywhere else. So we're just going to tidy this up and make everything sentence case except for the logo, which I've changed to all capitals to just make it look a little bit more like a logo rather than just some text. And the next problem was that the website looked a little bit left side heavy. So now we have this centered call to action. It's looking a bit better, but I still don't think it's quite with the section. So I'm going to take out this subheading and I'm going to put the services on one row, which tidies up this section and makes it a bit easier to read. And my next problem is that the whole thing just looks a little bit flat. So let's see if there's anything we can do to fix that. Are there any things we can lift off the page? So the first is the contact card. Since it overlaps the image, I think it really needs a shadow to lift it up off the page so it doesn't look like it's just been placed on. And the other thing is the email address box and the call to action. So you can do the same here to make it stand out even more. And this is what that looks like. So we've just lifted it off the page. The next thing I wanted to look at is the lack of icons. So icons are something that a lot of people overlook because they're small and it's tedious and it's a bit fiddly and a bit of a pain, but I really think they make a big difference. So we're going to go to my favorite icon website, which is Font Awesome. I always subscribe to their latest version because I use it all the time. They have lots of different styles of icon and just everything you might possibly need. But they do also have some free icons as well. So we're going to take some of their icons and just apply them like this. We've also changed the bullet points to check marks, which is something that I do. I very rarely have a bullet point unless it's in a blog post. I use some kind of icon, usually a check mark. Sometimes it could be a lightning bolt or a heart or something like that, depending on the website. And then we've added these really nice duotone icons to the services. And these are all from Font Awesome. We've also put a little right arrow icon in the button, and I think this just makes it look a little bit more interesting. Again, you're probably seeing a theme here. These are all really tiny changes, and you might think, what's the point? But hopefully you're seeing that all these little changes build up and make something much bigger. And then finally, in the polish section, we're going to see if there's anything else we can do to just give this page a bit more of a brand and a bit more of a personality. And when I'm not sure what to do, one of the easiest things you can do is just utilize custom shapes and make it into a branding element. So if you go to any search engine and type in vector shapes, you'll see a lot of websites that give you free or premium vectors to download. So we just want to find some nice shapes that we can use on our page to give it a bit more personality. So we can take any random shape and we can mask it with our image to create something a bit more interesting. If you don't know how to mask, just Google any software you're using, mask image in Sketch, mask image in Photoshop, whatever you're using, and pretty much any design tool can do this. And then we can also take that same shape once we've made a feature out of it in the image, and we can use it as our icon background to tie it all together. Another thing people do is they'll take shapes from their logo. So if you've got a logo already designed that's got some interesting shape in it, use that as a branding element throughout. And another thing we can do is use it as a very light footer background. Again, this is a little bit difficult for me to see on my screen right now, so hopefully you can see that change. But if not, I should probably make it a bit darker. But if not, I've used that same shape as the footer background, just as a little element poking out of the bottom right-hand side. So this is just the bit where we play around, have a little bit of fun. Try not to go too overboard. Remember that less is still more, especially when you're just starting out, but see different places where you can apply something like this. So here's the final design that we've come up with. And you can see that we've come a pretty long way from what we started with. Now, in reality, we could keep going over and over it, tweaking it and amending it until it's even better than it is now. And that's really all there is to design. It's just analyzing what's wrong, amending from it, and learning from it. And over time, you'll have to make less and less amends, and you'll be able to do that thing that designers seem so natural at. You'll be able to look at someone's design and instantly identify the problem areas that fixes them. And it just gets easier the more you do it. So before we finish, I just wanted to let you know that I do have a free email course which goes into a little bit more depth. It teaches you more about the principles of design. So if you're interested in learning more about things like color and typography, just go to learndesigncourse.com and you can sign up there. But really, I just want you to remember, if you take anything from this presentation, that most of design is just being able to stand back, identify the problem areas, fix them, and repeat. And I really want you to trust your gut. You know what looks good and what doesn't. You might not know why, but you can probably figure it out. You can look at something and say, why does that look good? And just think about it. So just like when my husband was building his gaming machine, he knew that it wouldn't work the first time, but he just kept at it until the light switched on and he was playing, I think it was Mass Effect 2 or something. It was a few years ago now. But just don't beat yourself up if you create something that doesn't look good the first go. Just use some of the tactics here and you definitely will see improvements, and it will continue to get easier over time. So that's it. Thank you so much for sticking with me. And yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions about
This was
design or
awesome.
anything.
This was
Cool.
awesome. Here is the first question from Chris. Would you review again what you said about changing the colors of the text? Do you change the colors of the text heading? Can you explain why? And what about the font weight? I mean, first, all thank you, Chris, for your question, and I would like others as well to step out with their questions, but also comment on the design. I'm really now trying to reconfirm my view. I think this is really beautiful what you did, and I
Thank
think
you.
it really stand it out seriously. So I don't know if people would use different colors or they would use a different hierarchy, but from my point of view, it was really, really, really nice way how to think. Yes, I agree, Chris. Thank you very much. It was really absolutely nice. So to answer Chris' question, what would you say?
So changing the colors of the text, do you change text heading? So for colors of text, I tend to use a lot of the same colors. I have a very dark gray. It's not usually quite black, but it's gray. If I'm doing if I'm doing a website that's using a lot of blues or purple or something on the cooler end of the color palette, I'll add a bit of that color into the gray. It's sort of hard to explain without the color picker in front of me, but if you've opened any design software and you see the color picker, it's got white here, black down here, and then you've got your red or whatever here. I go somewhere, if the blue's selected, I go somewhere down here. So I've got a little bit of blue within my gray. And then I pick a slightly lighter tint to go with the paragraph. And that's basically what I do for all my text. I use a lot of the same grays. I go more darker than I used to. One thing that I see a lot of amateur designers do, and that I used to do, was I used to use really light grays for my text because I thought it looked better. But now I'm completely opposite, and I think darker looks better because it looks more confident and it's easier to read. It's more accessible. So yeah, just go for it.
Before we move to another question, and before we move to the questions related to accessibility, I had a question. I need to understand how many font combinations I could use on a single pager, for instance. I've been seeing so many different web pages with tons of different font sizes and types, and then some only using one. So what's the best combination?
So I prefer to stick to one if possible. The only way I wouldn't is if I did something like I did in the presentation, which is I had a heading font that had a lot of character, and that wouldn't be suitable for long body copy. So even if you're just doing a simple landing page and you think, oh, there's not an awful lot of text here, at some point you're probably going to need to write a blog post or something like that. So you need to have one font that works for long form copy. Preferably for me, that font should also work for a headline, but a lot of the time, especially when you're using free fonts, it can look a little bit generic for the headline. So you might have one that's got a bit more character. You might also use a serif for the heading, which is the ones with the little flicks on, like Times New Roman or something. You wouldn't use Times New Roman, but that's what a serif font is. And then a sans serif, which is without the flicks for the body copy, vice versa. But yeah, I really prefer to use just one typeface. And that's another benefit of using premium fonts. And I sort of say this all the time, and I feel a bit bad saying it because they are pricey. And I know a lot of people can't, justify the expense if it's for maybe a side project, or maybe their client is like, no, I'm not going to pay that. But premium fonts are just such a game changer. They can make anything look so good, and you only need one font. So I wouldn't go more than two. The exception might be if I needed like a handwriting font, which sometimes I do. And occasionally I'll put that in an image. So if I have a diagram and I'm having like a handwritten font with arrows, which is something I do quite a lot, I might actually make that text part of the image, which a lot of people are against. But as long as it's just more of a decorative element than actual copywriting, I think it's totally fine. So that's the maximum I would do.
That's awesome. Is there any like a tool? I think you showed like too many tools tonight that you use. Would you mind later on sending those to me so I can include it in the YouTube description so
Yeah,
people can actually use those, and especially the link to the course and design academy. It would be nice if you can put it here in the chat so people could actually visit the page. In the
yeah.
meantime, before, well, I mean, we're still waiting for more questions. Yelena is asking a question on what is the color, how many colors actually, or color combinations you use on a single pager.
As many as you need. Obviously, start with one, and then most likely you'll need two. You'll need a brand color and you'll need an accent color. Sometimes, if it's a really minimal website, your brand color will be your accent color. And then to add more colors, I would just do it at the point where I need another one and one of the existing ones isn't good. I wouldn't say, to be honest, there's really a maximum, because a lot of really nicely designed websites do have quite intense color schemes, but experienced designers know how to make that work without it being overwhelming. Newer designers struggle more with that. So I would say start as small as you can, add more when you need to. But yeah, try not to have too much color, because it can be really distracting and really hard to make look professional.
How do we know? Is there a tool that measures the amount of color present on the page? How do we know that we are not just, going lunatic about colors?
I think honestly, I don't know if there's really a tool, because so much of design is, I think this is why computers can't do design. So much of design is just looking and seeing what you think. So the big thing that I do is I try to take as many breaks as I can. Um, when you're designing, you'll get to a point. I'm actually at this point. So, like I said at the start, I'm redesigning my client portal website at the minute. And it's a slow process because it's something I really want to get right. But I get to a point where I'm designing something and I'm like, I'm not sure if I like this. I either really like this or I really don't. And I'm thinking of a particular component that I've got at the minute where I've used 3 different colors in this one component. And I don't know if that's too much. So what I did is I wasn't getting anywhere. I just closed it and I'm not going to look at it again until tomorrow. And then I'm going to open it again tomorrow and see what my initial gut reaction is. Because it's that initial reaction that your customers are going to have. And that's what you want. That's what you want to try and find. When you've been looking at it for too long, you don't get that gut reaction. You can also send it to other people. I post things on Twitter if I'm not sure if I like it or not, and people on Twitter will say if they don't think it's working, so that's good. Send it to your partner, send it to your family, send it friends, colleagues, anyone, and just see what they think. But it's so much better to send something with a specific question. So if you've got a section like I do where I'm not sure if I've used too much color, send it to them, get their gut reaction, and then say, once they've given you their feedback, then say, do you think I've used too much color? If you send it to them and say, do you think I've used too much color? They'll be focused on that. You don't want them to focus on that, because then they'll say, oh yeah, I think you have actually. You want to know what their gut reaction was and then ask them about the color. And then they'll say, no, I never noticed that. I didn't think that was a problem. That felt like it was a bit rambly, but that's basically what I do and what I'm doing at the minute when I'm not sure if I've used the right amount of colors.
Speaking of colors, we're speaking also about accessibility. I mean, when you create your client sites, for instance, in their brand colors, do you also advise them like to have a page that it's, let's say, adapted for people who have problems with colors they are actually putting in front? How do you advise in that case?
Yeah, so almost every client project that I do, I actually do a brand refresh. Uh, so I don't tend to do massive redesigns, but a lot of people who want a redesign, they're not happy with their brand. It might be a decade or more old, so it's probably going to be a little bit outdated, and I'll do a refresh. So I'll keep the existing branding colors, but I'll tweak them. So if they use gray and orange, I'll still use gray and orange, but I'll just make it a bit more whatever it needs to be, or more vibrant, less vibrant, whatever, more contrast. And I'll sort of modernize their logo. But I think it's really important when you're doing a redesign, if you work with clients, to not change too much of a brand, because it still needs to be recognizable. If it's an established business, I'd prefer to do tweaks to improve it than just do a full rebrand, because like with Client Portal, it's been around for, it's only been around for, I think, like 5 or 6 years, but that's still a decent amount of time. I want it to still be recognizable. I don't want it to be a complete change. So I'm going to keep the colors, but tweak them. I'm going to change the typeface, but not change it too much that it's too drastic. So that's typically what I do. And that sort of goes in with the accessibility point, because years ago, we weren't even thinking about accessibility. Most people weren't. Now, everyone is. It's just a given now, especially with color contrast. I think pretty much every designer, developer will always check their typography in a color contrast tool. I almost feel like I don't need to say it anymore, which is really good. So that's just one thing that will happen naturally.
All right, our show is coming to an end slowly. I wanted to, before actually we start closing the session, I wanted to ask you, are you a person who prefers to build a site from scratch or to redesign already existing website? What's your preference there?
I think I prefer redesign, because I like working on something that already works, something that you can have, you can make design decisions based on an actual reason, rather than feeling like it's just a shot in the dark. When I'm doing an initial design, I honestly try to do it much faster than I would do a redesign, because the important thing with doing a first design is knowing that the first design is probably not going to work. The content might not be right. The product might not be right. So you don't want to spend a lot of time on it because you'll become too precious about it. You need to get something up there because it's going to change. Whereas a redesign, you already know the messaging works, you already know the product works, and you can really focus on polishing the design and making it something really special, which is what I love to do. So I would say redesign.
Awesome. And my last question to you is, when we talk about design, we also talk about conversion. And I'm sure that if we start talking about the dependency between the design and conversion, I'm sure we just need to show and a session for this, right? So what are the best ways to advise clients when it comes to improving the design for the purpose of improving the return of investment or conversion of the web?
Yeah. I'd say the most important thing is the copy. So hiring a copywriter is just the best thing you can do. I actually hired one for the client portal redesign. I didn't hire someone to do I'll actually see if I can find her. Let me see if I've got her website, because it was honestly the best thing I ever did. I hired a copywriter. She didn't do the full copywriting for me, but she did a teardown of my website, and she gave me a really good structure for how the new website should work. What I then do is I put it into a Google Doc. So I'll write the copy in a Google Doc, and I'll try to format it as much as possible. So make the headings big, use tables to do a bit of the layout. And you can actually do quite a lot of design in a Google Doc. And the important thing there is in terms of conversions, that's going to be the biggest thing. Does the content read really well? Is it flowing nicely? Have you got a really strong call to action? And then you can take that Google Doc with your formatted content and then do the process that we talked about in the presentation, which is, okay, I'm going to look at this section here and I'm going to look for inspiration for my layout. And in all honesty, the actual design process is, in terms of conversions, there are things you can do, make the call to action stand out, make the headline bold and big and the first thing that you see. But it's mostly about the content, in my opinion. And actually, I've got an example in a different presentation that I've got of a company who sold like thousands of dollars of work with a landing page they made in a Google Doc within about 30 minutes. So you don't actually need a website at all, which is funny to say as a designer, that the design isn't as important, but it's really not as important. Is important, not as important.
This is awesome. I learned so much, and judging from the comments that we received in the chat, I think everybody just loved what you presented, because from a pure text, I think you enlighten the text, or let's say you made it live. So we really enjoyed. Thank you very much. We hope to see you more in future when it comes to actually creating or starting your career or extending your career as a designer in WordPress world. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us tonight. Laura, I'm sure everybody is able to reach you on Twitter or at the relevant links. We will also provide the links in the YouTube description of a video, which will be posted in about 24 to 48 hours. So if you like, seriously, this was an excellent webinar. This is what Chris says. I look forward to watching the recording again as I work on my next project. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That, yeah, I'm
It's like
feeling
the best thing I could hear. It's amazing. It makes it all worth it.
it's awesome. Yes, Chris, I'm surely please get in touch. Let's talk more. I hope to see you more, Laura, in the next months, perhaps on different topics. Maybe we can talk about conversion design and conversion, because that's really the key point for. I mean, I think this is where the final trust between the web designer or a developer, depending who actually is doing the website design at this moment, is actually giving the trust to the client who is trying to make money online. So this is something what we can discuss. Until
Definitely.
next time we will meet on 14th of March. We're going to have a femtech conference related meetup, where lots of women will be joining us, actually talking about their career in IT. We might even see people that we see here tonight. So Chris, we would like to invite you, but this is a femtech thing, so you might want to join as well. In the meantime, I wish you all the best, and I hope to see you at WordFest, which is taking place this Friday. If you have time, GoDaddy Pro has a booth there, and we will be more than happy to check on you. Long live the FanTech! That's great. Please, thank you, everyone. We'll see you then next time. See you.
Thank you. Bye.